Attention. This is a special report from the Voice of Truth about the living Creator and His living voice. Little children, the Creator is the truth, and truth is the Creator, and truth has a voice, not a book. And in order to know the Creator, the truth, you must know the voice. His voice is living. That means it's active, breathing with life, an essence that's constantly undergoing activity, that's constantly in motion, progressing and creating. And little children, He wants you to hear this truth, that the Creator who made the stars speaks today by a living voice in the here and now of the present. And the living Creator is active. That's what it means when you're talking about what is living. You're not speaking of what is frozen. You're not speaking of what is stuck in the past, but you're speaking of what is living, alive, and full of life. And this is the voice of truth we're speaking of. That means we're speaking of something that is infinite, something that is forever. We're not speaking of something that is limited. We're not speaking of something that has an end, but we're speaking of what has no beginning and has no end. The voice of truth has always been, and the voice of truth always will be. And when it comes to the voice of truth, you have to remember the voice of truth is something that is found in the spirit. That means it's spiritual. You have to be spiritual, little children, if you're going to hear the voice of truth. See, if you're going to know the Creator, you have to know His voice. And if you know His voice, that means you have to be spiritual. If you want to know His voice, that means you cannot be fleshly. You cannot go after this digital simulation thinking that this is the real world, but you have to count this world as nothing more than a dream world, and you have to count the spirit world as the real world. Now, when it comes to His voice, what is a voice? A voice is a will expressed by the sound made through the mouth of a living being. That means that there is no need for you to look outwardly. There's no need for you to get an interpretation or an interpreter to explain things, but this is a sound that you either recognize or you don't. And when it comes to the voice of truth, His expressions are constant. His expressions come through the mouths of His people. When it comes to looking and hearing this voice, little children, you have to look inwardly. This is to be spiritual. When you look inwardly, you're feeling for the voice of truth. You're feeling for the sound of true love. You're taking the time out and you're looking inwardly, not in your mind, but in your heart. The living voice of truth is in the spirit, and the living voice of truth is in the heart, little children. And when it comes to hearing the living voice of truth, to hear the voice of truth, we have to have heart faith. And heart faith is when you have trust in the expressions of your heart. That's the only way that you're going to hear His voice. See, it's not possible to hear the voice of truth when you're putting your trust in something that you can hold in your hand. Remember, the voice of truth is in the spirit. That means you have to be spiritual. You cannot be dealing with anything natural. So when you look to hear His voice, you have to remember that it cannot be based on anything natural. It cannot be grasped in your flesh mind. Your flesh, little children, cannot receive the voice of truth, because the voice of truth is spirit, and spirit only speaks to spirit, not the flesh. The flesh is dead, but the spirit is living. The flesh, it goes into the ground, but the spirit will live on forever. So when it comes to hearing his voice, you may have those times where you don't hear from God. Well, praying and going into a period of fasting, that will help oftentimes. But remember, your flesh cannot hear from the voice of truth. You cannot be fully awake in the conscious state and hear from the voice of truth, but oftentimes you'll have to be in a sleep state or a trance to hear from the voice of truth. A sleep state, that means when you go to sleep, that's when the Creator plants his words of life in our heart. Oftentimes I'll go to sleep, and in the morning, the next day, I'll wake up knowing something that I didn't know before. And I'm speaking now, little children, of the eternal covenant, which is the eternal covenant of the heart. See, the voice of truth is not found in a building. He's not found in a church, a mosque, a synagogue, but the voice of truth is only found in your heart. It's not found in your mind. See, your mind, little children, will always doubt and oppose the voice of truth. See, remember, you're dealing with the Creator God, and when you deal with the Creator God and his living voice, you're dealing with infinite possibilities. That means there's no limitation that you can place on his infinite voice, but his voice will speak miracles to you. His voice will give you fresh revelations to you. His voice will give you wisdom that the natural mind cannot explain. It is a miraculous occurrence, and that brings us to the very device that the enemy made to stop the voice of truth. Because remember, little children, you've got to be spiritual if you're going to hear the voice of truth. And the main device that the enemy made to stop people from hearing the voice of truth, to kill spirituality, is the Bible. The Bible, which is an idol. It's the book of the dead. And remember, the Creator is not dead, but he has a living spirit and he has a living voice. But this device called the Bible has been used to stop people from hearing the voice of truth inside of their heart. And it bounds a person in their flesh because it makes them think they can understand God with their mind. But remember, the flesh mind cannot hear the voice of truth, neither can the flesh mind grasp and understand the things of God. But the grasping and understanding are based on the things of the Spirit. A living relationship, little children, is based on living words of life. And when you look to a Bible, you're not looking to living words of life, but you're looking to dead words that have already been lived out. You're looking to the past and not the present. You're looking to what has been written and not to what is being written right now inside of your heart. See, the Bible killed off the voice of truth and has suppressed freedom, love, and real life, because the living Jesus has been turned into a script. When they turned the living Jesus into a Bible Jesus, that's when people stopped receiving fresh revelation. That's when people stopped having the ability to feel for God. That's when people's hearts have grown cold today. And that's why it's hard for the voice of truth to get through, because people are looking into a book instead of feeling for God in their heart. Now let me give you an example of what I'm speaking of how the Bible is the word of death and not the word of life. That if you're going to have life, you got to look to the living voice of truth that's not found in a book, but that's only found in your heart. See, if you're going to know the Creator, little children, you got to recognize his sound. So one day I was in my bedroom. I had just filled up a bottle of water with some tap water. I had ran out of the store-bought water, so I figured that I would go to the tap and I would just get some water from the faucet. I didn't think it was a big deal at the time. So after I filled up my jug with that tap water, whatever I was doing was taking care of errands, cleaning up my room. My eyes kept drifting back towards that jug of water. And my flesh mind did not understand why. Why did I keep looking at that jug of water? But I went to sleep that night. And that night, the voice of truth spoke to me. And the very next morning, the Spirit had revealed to me by the voice of truth that aluminum was in the water. And from that point on, I knew not to get water from the tap. Otherwise, I'd become sick. Little children, I could not have known that from reading a Bible. But I could have only known that by hearing the voice of truth speak to my heart. When the voice of truth spoke to me, I didn't need an interpreter. I didn't need a specific translation. And you got to understand, little children, they want you bound in the flesh. Death Satan wants you studying a book. Death Satan wants you to think you can worship God in the flesh. Death Satan wants you to think you can hear from God while you're in the flesh. But remember, the words of the Bible are for the flesh, because the flesh is dead, and the words in the Bible are the words of death. But the words of the Spirit are for spirit, and they are the words of life. So you can't go by a Bible, because if I was reading a Bible, I would have heard the false phantom voice of Bible Jesus, and I would have thought to myself, well, I'll be all right because I got a promise from Jesus that if I drink any deadly thing, it will not harm me. But living Jesus told me differently. The living Jesus said, if I drink that water, I'll put aluminum in my body and I'll end up in the hospital bed. So you can't get that from reading the Bible, little children. The living voice of truth told me that faith was hijacked, that Constantine hijacked the faith. I could not get that from reading the Bible, little children. See, the living voice of truth told me that this was a digital simulation. That means this is not the real world. I could not have gotten that from reading the Bible, little children. The living voice of truth told me that because this is a simulation, then I'm not my body. I could not have gotten that from reading the Bible, little children. The living voice of truth told me to be crisp and believe all things are possible. I could not have gotten that from reading the Bible, little children. Let the voice of truth guide you home, little children. The voice of truth will be your guide. The voice of truth will be your shield. The voice of truth will be your inspiration. The voice of truth will be your power. The voice of truth will be your comfort. The voice of truth will be your wisdom. The voice of truth will be your healer. The voice of truth will be your enlightenment. The voice of truth lives. That's what he told me. He said the voice of truth lives back in 2011, and he wants you to hear this so you learn to burn the book and look within your heart, because the Bible cannot guide you, and the Bible cannot reveal the real Jesus. But the only way you're gonna know the real Jesus, the only way you're gonna know the real God, is when you listen for the living voice of truth. That's not found in a book, it's not found in a building, but it's found in you. The Bible is the book of the dead, and the Bible is an alien implant.